The burning plastic smell was still tightening the air around me when I realized my own son was holding the door shut. Still, I kept my palm on the hot doorknob, letting it sting steady me instead of the fear clawing at my lungs. As the smoke thickened, that same bitter smell sharpened into a truth he thought I wouldn't live long enough to name. While it curled around my face, I finally heard his silence for what it was: permission for the fire to finish me. The same rising heat that was meant to end me became the proof that rebuilt my strength. That's when I decided, if I survived that room, I'd walk straight into the bank and burn his future instead of mine. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Judy's breath caught in her throat as the acrid smell hit her, plastic burning, something chemical and wrong. She froze in the hallway, her body stiffening even before her lungs had the chance to tighten. The air was thick, as though something was smoldering somewhere in the house, and her instincts told her it wasn't the usual small malfunction. The utility room, the furnace, the place where things always went wrong. She moved forward, her slippers making soft taps on the hardwood as she navigated the house. Her asthma, mild but present, stirred uneasily at the back of her chest, but she ignored it. The smell grew stronger with every step. Something was burning. Brandon, her voice was casual, too casual, though the unease curled in her stomach. No answer. Her pace quickened and she reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing the cool metal. As she twisted it, a thick plume of smoke exploded from the crack between the door and the frame, swallowing her instantly. The air burned, her eyes watered, her throat constricted. Judy gasped, but it didn't help. The smoke was everywhere now, thick as fog, choking out the world. She stumbled backward, trying to retreat, but the door slammed shut behind her with a force that made her heart race. Her pulse quickened. Brandon, she choked out, coughing violently, her chest seizing. Stay calm, Mom. His voice came from the other side of the door, too steady, too calm. Judy pressed her palm against the door, but it was locked. She tried the knob again, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged in her chest, but she pushed it down, concentrating on the sound of Brandon's voice, trying to convince herself that he was just worried, just scared. But something was wrong. The voice on the other side wasn't rushed, it wasn't panicked, it was too controlled. Judy's lungs screamed for air, every inhale more desperate than the last. The smoke swirled, thick and pungent, clinging to her skin. She sank to her knees, coughing until her ribs ached, her body trembling with every failed breath. Her inhaler. She needed her inhaler. It was in the kitchen, just a few steps away, but she couldn't get there. She pulled at the doorknob again, her fingers slick with sweat, but it wouldn't turn. The sound of his voice drifted through the smoke once more. Just stay calm, Mom, he repeated, his tone unnervingly calm. The words echoed in her ears, but all she could hear was the thick, crackling noise coming from behind the door. Judy's mind raced, adrenaline pumping, but the smoke was making it hard to think. It felt like her lungs were being squeezed, like the air was being ripped from her. Another violent cough racked her body, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her vision dimming at the edges. Her hand fell to the cold tile. She was slipping, darkness creeping at the edges of her sight. Her last thought before the world closed in was the strangest one. Why isn't Brandon opening the door? Judy's head swam in the fog of smoke and panic, each breath harder than the last, her chest crushed under an invisible weight. The cold tile beneath her hand felt like the only thing keeping her grounded, but even that seemed to be slipping away as her vision flickered in and out. She couldn't stay down here, not like this. With a shuddering breath, she forced herself onto her hands and knees, her legs weak beneath her. She couldn't think, she couldn't breathe, but she had to do something. She wasn't going to die in this godforsaken room, not like this. The utility room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing in with every step. She staggered to her feet, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other bracing her chest. Her fingers brushed against the window, a small rectangle of possible escape. The pane was frosted over, the glass cold and slick beneath her trembling fingers. She couldn't see through the smoke. It was all just haze, thick and cloying. But she needed air, just a sliver of fresh air to cool the heat in her lungs, to make the world outside this room feel real again. Her hand shook violently as she opened the window just wide enough to let in the winter air. The rush of cold felt like a shock to her stem, biting into her skin, but it was enough to clear the suffocating haze, just enough to give her the smallest reprieve. She sucked in the cold air, deep and frantic, but it did little to ease the burning in her lungs. Her mind was spinning now, the world outside seeming so far away, and yet from the corner of her eye something flickered. Movement, figures in the yard. She turned her head, straining to see through the smoke. There in the muted grayness was Brandon. He was pacing back and forth, his outline shifting with the flicker of the firelight as if he were waiting for something. Watching, he didn't look worried. He didn't look like someone concerned for his mother's safety. A knot twisted in Judy's stomach, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something darker. A quiet, creeping realization that made her blood run cold. She couldn't hear his footsteps, but she could see him, steady, deliberate, like he was planning something or waiting for her to be gone. She pushed herself to her feet again, each movement slower, her body refusing to cooperate as the weight of her thoughts pressed down on her. The smoke was thickening again, burning her lungs, but she couldn't look away from him. And then, just as she was starting to crumble under the weight of it all, she heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible through the walls and the crackling fire. Is she done yet? It was Brandon's voice, it was Aaron's. Judy froze, the blood draining from her face. Her heart hammered in her chest. She strained her ears, trying to make sense of the words. She hadn't imagined it, she hadn't. There was no mistaking it. Aaron was waiting too, waiting for her to be gone. A sick, crawling feeling spread across her skin. It wasn't just Brandon anymore. It was Aaron too. They had both been waiting. They had both been planning. And now here she was, trapped in this room, gasping for air, fighting for her life, while they stood outside watching her die. Her hands trembled with betrayal, with fury, with something darker. Something she hadn't realized she was capable of feeling for them. They were her family, her own son, her daughter-in-law, the people she'd raised and loved. And now they were standing outside, talking about her like she was already dead. The fire alarms went off, their wailing shrieks slicing through the air, cutting through the smoke, making Judy flinch. It was a small relief, help was on the way, but in that moment it felt like nothing more than an insult. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She couldn't move. The seconds stretched on, endless and suffocating. Judy forced herself to focus, to hold on to the single shred of clarity she had left. She couldn't let them win. She wouldn't die here, not like this. With every ounce of strength she had left, she shoved herself toward the door, her hands still shaking, but her resolve harder than ever. But even as she reached for the knob, her mind kept circling back to that one cold thought: why didn't they help me? Brandon's hand was cold against her wrist as he crouched beside her, voice high with false concern. "Mom, are you okay?" he shouted, his face twisted in exaggerated worry. His eyes darted from her to the fire trucks and back to her, but there was no real panic in him. Judy saw it now, his act was too smooth, his worry too practiced. The paramedics had moved her to the grass, the cool air a harsh contrast to the suffocating smoke she'd just escaped. Judy's chest still ached with the effort to breathe, but the oxygen mask helped. She took shallow, desperate breaths as Brandon hovered, his voice pitched higher than usual. I'm fine, Judy rasped, fighting to keep her composure. She could see the firefighters moving toward the utility room, still battling the last of the flames, and yet something gnawed at her. It didn't feel right. She wasn't dead, but the fear in their voices was all too familiar, like they expected her to be. Aaron was standing nearby, wrapped in a blanket that she hadn't been handed by anyone, standing far too still for someone who should be frantic. Her eyes flicked toward Judy, then away, as if the scene before her was a performance she'd memorized. "They were just so careless," Aaron muttered loud enough for those near her to hear, like a well-rehearsed line. "She must have left something running, forgot to turn it off. You know how she gets." She was already distancing herself from the possibility of blame, explaining it all away with ease. Judy didn't look at Aaron. Instead, her eyes scanned the scene, the smoke clearing, the firefighters still moving with purpose. Maddie, on the other hand, was glued to her side, wide-eyed and trembling. Judy squeezed her granddaughter's hand weakly, trying to offer comfort, though it was hard to hold back the rising sense of betrayal. "Grandma, you're okay, right?" Maddie's voice trembled, her face a mix of fear and confusion. Judy nodded, though her heart clenched. It wasn't just he fire that was consuming her now. A voice interrupted the tension, a deep, controlled voice. "Ma'am, Ms. Callahan." Fire Marshal Redding was standing beside her now, his gaze sharp, his eyes flicking over the scene before settling on her. "Yes," Judy said quietly, pushing herself into a more upright position, the mask still tethered to her face. "I'm fine." Redding didn't look convinced. He didn't ask her anything immediately. Instead, he simply studied her for a moment, noting the unspoken things, what wasn't being said, the hesitation, the way Brandon was already making excuses in the background. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked, his voice calm but direct. Judy nodded slowly, careful with her words. "I smelled something burning when the door slammed behind me." The fire still smoldered in the background, but for Judy it wasn't the flames that were dangerous. It was the silence she was forced to live in now. Redding nodded, still watching her closely. He moved toward the utility room without saying anything else, but his question lingered. "Did you leave something running?" Judy's gaze shifted toward Brandon, who was watching her, waiting for her answer. She knew he was already working out his next move. "I don't think so," she said, her voice steady, but inside she knew. The truth was already slipping away, and only one person was left holding the key. The cool, sterile air of urgent care was a welcome relief after the choking heat of the fire, though the sharp sting of the oxygen mask still burned her face. Judy sat propped up on the examination table, her lungs gradually filling with air, the pain in her chest starting to ease. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tank was like a slow, steady beat, soothing in its predictability after the chaos of the fire. But even as her body began to recover, her mind stayed sharp, laser-focused. The fire, the smoke, Brandon's false concern, all of it kept looping through her thoughts. She had almost died, she had almost been gone. She glanced up at the nurse who was checking the IV drip in her arm, giving her space but keeping a watchful eye. Judy appreciated the silence, though it made the thoughts clearer, the thoughts she couldn't ignore. The money. Brandon's complaints had been growing more frequent in the last few months. Every conversation seemed to circle back to her finances, her retirement, how she was wasting it on pointless things. He had been relentless about his plans for the future, the house, the accounts. Aaron was worse, always hinting that Judy needed to start planning ahead for when things went south. They'd both made it clear in their own way that they felt entitled to her savings. Judy closed her eyes, breathing deeply through the mask. She remembered the way they looked at her, those moments when the conversation veered just a bit too close to the line. The sly questions about her will, her life insurance. The subtle insinuations that she was the one holding them back, as though her years of careful planning and hard work were selfish acts, not investments in her future security. And then there was the fire. That had been the final straw. There was no way it was an accident. She'd been locked inside that room with the door slammed shut, her lungs burning as she fought for air. It had been Brandon's voice, calm and distant, telling her to stay calm. His voice had been too calm. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. It was all adding up now. The nurse returned to adjust the mask, checking the flow of oxygen. "You're doing great," she said kindly, but Judy barely heard her. They wanted her gone. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control, about taking everything she had worked for. She had to act fast. Judy took a steadying breath and swung her legs off the table, pushing herself upright. The nurse stepped back, surprised. "Ma'am, you're not fully cleared yet." "I'm fine," Judy replied, her voice hoarse but determined. "I need to go home." She wasn't waiting around any longer. The nurse didn't argue, just handed her a pair of crumpled discharge papers, and Judy was already out of the exam room before she could even finish signing them. At home, the air felt different. Everything was too quiet. The usual hum of the furnace and appliances seemed muted, as though the house was holding its breath. She moved through the hallway, past the living room, to the staircase leading to her bedroom. Her mind raced as she climbed the stairs. She could still smell the remnants of the smoke on her clothes, though the fire was miles away now, but there was no mistaking what she had to do. She reached the small closet at the end of her bedroom hallway, and her fingers trembled as she opened the door. The fireproof lockbox sat in the back corner, tucked under a pile of old linens and unused blankets. She pulled it out, the weight of it solid and reassuring in her hands. Inside, it was all there, her old will. Her life insurance policies, the financial logs she kept meticulously for years, all filed in neat order. Everything that would outlast her. But it wasn't just for her anymore. Judy knew the truth now. It was for Maddie, it was for herself. It was for the future, the one Brandon and Aaron had tried to steal from her. She flipped open the folder containing her will and scanned it quickly, her eyes catching the part where she'd written Brandon and Aaron out of the estate. The words had been there for years, but now they felt final. She could almost hear Brandon's voice in her head, the resentment, the anger at her refusal to help him out with his debts, the way he'd tried to manipulate her into giving up what was hers. No more, she was done. Her fingers hovered over the phone on the desk beside the lockbox. With a steady breath, she picked it up, dialing the number she'd memorized years ago. "Lydia Carson," the voice on the other end said, sharp and knowing. "What can I do for you, Ms. Callahan?" "I need you to prepare everything," Judy said, her voice low but firm. "I'm cutting them out of everything. I want to make sure that they never get a penny." There was a slight pause on the other end, then Lydia's voice returned, steady and calm. "I'll take care of it, Judy. It'll be done. Just tell me what you want." Judy's eyes drifted back to the lockbox, to the will, to the life she had carefully built. "It's time to protect it all," Judy said. "I need to make sure they never touch it." As she set the phone back down, her pulse steadied. She had nothing left to lose, and for the first time in days, she felt the power return, creeping up her spine, surging through her chest. This was just the beginning. The air in Lydia Carson's office was crisp with the faint scent of leather-bound books and freshly printed paper. Judy sat at the sleek mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, though her knuckles were tight from the weight of what she was about to do. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed in a steady, muted rhythm. It should have felt like a place of business, but for Judy it felt more like a courtroom, an arena where she would make her case not just for herself but for the future she was determined to protect. Lydia sat across from her, her eyes calculating, already poised with the quiet intensity that came with decades of experience. Her hands were poised above a fresh set of documents, the ink still sharp and ready to be signed. "Let's get started," Lydia said, her voice low but firm. Judy nodded, the only answer she could give. There was no turning back now. Lydia slid the first document toward her, a new will meticulously drafted with Brandon's name now absent from any mention. Judy's heart beat faster as she traced the lines of the legal jargon. This was it, the part where she stopped being a passive observer in her own life and finally took control. "You're sure about this, Judy?" Lydia asked, her eyes flicking up to meet hers. "Once this is signed, there's no undoing it." Judy's fingers brushed the edge of the paper and she nodded, her throat tight. "I'm sure." Lydia handed her a pen and Judy signed. The ink left a permanent mark on her future and, more importantly, erased Brandon from any part of it. The new trust document followed. The words were blunt but necessary. "Maddie, my granddaughter, is the sole beneficiary with any remaining assets to be distributed among specific charities." Judy swallowed the lump in her throat, feeling the weight of that choice. It wasn't just money, it was security. It was peace of mind for a child who had seen far too much already. She signed again. Each stroke felt like an act of defiance, of reclaiming what had been nearly taken from her. "There's one more thing we need to address," Lydia said, pulling another sheet of paper from the stack. "Powers of attorney. You need to make sure Brandon and Aaron are removed entirely from any control over your affairs." Judy hesitated, her fingers pausing above the paper. The thought of handing over that power to someone else felt final, like severing the last thread that connected her to the past. But it was necessary. "They've been manipulating me for months," Judy said, her voice barely a whisper. "I trusted them and they almost killed me. I'm not giving them anything anymore." Lydia nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She slid the document closer to Judy. "This is the final step. We'll ensure that they have no claim to anything, legally speaking. No access to your accounts, no say in your medical decisions. You'll retain full control over everything." Judy signed without a second thought. As Lydia gathered the signed papers, she paused, her fingers skimming through a stack of documents in front of her. She held one up, a printout of Judy's recent banking activity. "I need to show you something," Lydia said, her voice laced with an edge of surprise. Judy's gaze flicked to the screen, her stoma. CH tightened as she recognized the list of attempted transactions. A few were minor, just routine checks, until she saw the IP address attached to the last set of logins. Brandon's IP. "What is this?" Judy's voice was cold, shock mixing with a surge of fury. "Why was he accessing my account?" Lydia's brow furrowed. "It looks like he's been trying to transfer funds, change beneficiaries. This happened several times over the last few months." She glanced at Judy, her expression hardening. "He's been testing the waters, seeing how much control he could get." Judy's heart sank. It wasn't just about the fire. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the lengths Brandon was willing to go to, how far he would push to get his hands on what was hers. Lydia clicked the screen off, her voice low. "This changes things. We'll have to report this activity immediately. It's unauthorized access, which is a criminal offense." The finality of it hit Judy all at once. She wasn't just protecting herself from betrayal, she was now facing down the full force of her own son's greed, and the truth was undeniable. This was no accident. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to take what wasn't his. Judy stood slowly, her legs weak from the rush of adrenaline that had surged through her moments before. Lydia began filing the papers away, but Judy's mind raced ahead, already constructing the next steps. She was no longer a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. "You'll be hearing from me soon," Judy said, her voice steady but hard. "This isn't over." Lydia didn't respond immediately, but her eyes flickered with respect. "I'll handle it, Judy. I'll make sure they can't touch a thing." Judy turned, walking out of the office with a renewed sense of power, a weight that had once crushed her now lifting from her shoulders. She had a plan, and she wasn't going to stop until she had taken back everything they had tried to steal. The battle had just begun, but this time the fight would be on her terms. Judy stepped through the front door like she owned the place again. The house still carried a faint, bitter trace of smoke, buried under a cheap blast of plug-in air freshener. Someone had tried to scrub the memory out of the walls. It hadn't worked. Brandon popped up from the couch so fast the remote clattered to the floor. His smile was instant, stretched a little too wide. "Hey, Mom," he shoved his hands into his pockets. "Must have been terrifying, huh? You doing okay?" He was trying for concerned son. Judy just watched him, quiet, letting the silence sit between them. His eyes flicked to hers, then away. She caught the small twitch in his jaw when she didn't respond right away. "I'm managing," she said finally, hanging her coat on the hook like she'd just come from the grocery store, not from her lawyer's office. Erin hurried in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel she clearly didn't need. Her laugh was breathy, already defensive. "The fire guy said it was probably the door," she started, words tumbling out. "You know, with the heat warping the frame, it can happen in old houses. The wood swells, the latch sticks, and boom, door won't open. Totally freak thing." Too many details, too fast. Judy turned her head toward the hallway, toward the utility room. The door there was propped open now, the frame blotched with black, but the scorch marks, she stepped closer, pretending to study them casually. They formed a neat crescent around the knob and latch, darker in a strangely even band. Not wild, irregular licking flames. Controlled, applied. You practiced this, she thought. You wanted it to look right. Behind her, Aaron kept talking. And with the alarms being so old and the wiring, I told Brandon we should have upgraded, but money's tight and… That's enough, Aaron, Brandon cut in with a tight smile. Mom doesn't need a whole science lesson. Judy glanced back in time to catch the flash of panic in Aaron's eyes before she swallowed it down. Maddie hovered at the edge of the hallway, half hidden by the wall. Judy offered her a small smile. Maddie's lips moved soundlessly. Please leave soon. The words hit harder than any cough. Judy's chest tightened, not from smoke this time, but from the realization that Maddie wasn't just scared of fire, she was scared of them. Before Judy could respond, a firm knock rattled the front door once, then opened without waiting for an answer. Fire Marshal Cole Redding stepped inside, hat in hand, dark coat dusted with road grit. He nodded politely to Judy, then did a slow sweep of the room, his gaze pausing on the utility hallway. Afternoon, he said. Didn't mean to barge in, just needed to follow up on a few things. Brandon's smile returned a little thinner. I thought you guys wrapped this up. You said it looked like, what was it, localized malfunction? He forced a laugh. Crazy freak thing, right? Redding didn't laugh. We've ruled out a few causes, he said. That's why I'm here. Aaron stepped forward, clutching the dish tool like a life preserver. We already told you everything. She went to check the room, the door jammed, and the fire. Redding finally looked at her, just one flat, unimpressed glance. I'm going to need to see the utility room again, he said, and I'll need to talk to everyone individually this time. Judy felt the atmosphere shift, like the moment before a storm breaks. Brandon's jaw tensed. Is that really necessary? He asked, voice edged now. We're all saying the same thing. Redding's gaze slid back to Judy and stayed there, steady and searching. Funny thing about fires, he said quietly, they don't always say what people want them to. Maddie's fingers found Judy's hand, small and cold. And for the first time, Judy wondered, not if Brandon would be caught, but how much Maddie had already seen. The quiet hum of the house seemed to press in on Judy as Fire Marshal Redding moved toward the utility room. Brandon and Aaron were still standing in the living room, an uneasy silence hanging between them. Judy's mind raced, her thoughts sharp and focused despite the heavy weight pressing on her chest. She could feel the shift in the air, the moment when everything she had been trying to ignore suddenly began to unravel. Redding didn't say anything as he crossed the threshold into the utility room. His eyes scanned the scorch marks on the door, the unevenness of them, the unnatural symmetry. He stepped further in, lifting the edge of the rubber mat that lay near the furnace. He didn't even flinch when he saw the blackened spots that stained the floor. This wasn't caused by an accident, Redding muttered to himself, barely loud enough for Judy to hear. This was deliberate. Judy's pulse quickened. She'd known it, but hearing him confirm it made the reality feel even more final. She let her eyes drift to the open furnace door, now covered in soot. They did this. She'd spent years in this house, years feeling safe behind its walls, and now it all felt like a lie. Redding knelt down, inspecting the furnace's ignition system, his gloved fingers brushing over something that made him pause. He straightened slowly and looked at the floor, studying the scorch marks around the furnace. These marks are too even, he said, his voice steady cold. And this section of the pipe, it's been tampered with. There's no way this was just a malfunction. Judy felt something tighten in her chest as she turned away. She couldn't look at the furnace any longer. They wanted her dead, and now Redding knew it too. The memories flooded back to her in a rush, the small incidents she had chalked up to forgetfulness or bad luck. The stove burner that was left on for hours, a near miss when the gas line had been so close to overheating, she could smell it every time she walked into the kitchen. Aaron had always played it off like it was nothing. Mom, you know how you are with the stove, she'd said. You forget things sometimes. The circuit breaker that tripped near her medical equipment, the one that had stopped working, the one that had left her gasping for air that night. Aaron had seemed too calm, too quick to fix it. Oh, the breaker just went out, she'd said, as if it was nothing. I'll call someone to fix it tomorrow. Brandon had been absent, but the moments were always there. His indifference, his apathy, how he'd pushed her to downsize to save him from his debts. Now it was all coming together. The fire wasn't a mistake. It had been part of a plan that had been unfolding for far too long. She shifted slightly, trying to focus, and that's when she felt a small hand slip into hers. Maddie was standing beside her now, so quiet, her face pale. Without a word, Maddie pressed something small and folded into her palm, a note. Judy opened it slowly. Mom said we'll be rich soon. The words felt like a slap to her chest, each letter another reminder of how far this had gone. Rich, as if it was all just about the money. The money that they had tried to take from her by any means necessary. And now they thought Maddie didn't understand, that she couldn't see what was happening. But Judy knew. Maddie had seen more than anyone realized. Judy squeezed her granddaughter's hand, slipping the note into her pocket before anyone not. Iced, she had to keep it safe. It would be the piece of evidence that tied everything together, a symbol of their manipulation, their control. The message was clear. Behind her, Redding was still inspecting the room. His gaze flicked to the door frame again, the careful alignment of the burn marks. He wasn't done. He was piecing it together just like Judy. And that thought, that quiet certainty that they were both closing in on the same truth, made Judy feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone in this fight. Redding stood up slowly and turned toward her, his face unreadable. "I'm going to need to take a deeper look at the rest of the house," he said, "but it looks like we've got a pattern, and patterns, they're not just coincidences." He didn't need to say more. Judy nodded. She didn't speak. There was no need. He had already seen the truth, and now it was just a matter of making sure they couldn't escape. But as Redding moved toward the kitchen, Judy's hand hovered near the pocket where the note was tucked. The weight of it felt heavier now, an undeniable truth she had to face. Maddie was scared. She wasn't just scared of fire. She was scared of them. And Judy would do whatever it took to protect her from a future that wasn't just about money, it was about control. Judy's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Who set the fire, Redding?" she asked, her words measured. Redding's voice was steady but taut with a seriousness she hadn't heard before. "The fire's been analyzed. The ignition points weren't accidental. Someone tampered with the furnace on purpose. And the burn pattern on that door, it doesn't look like the fire spread by itself." Judy's fingers clenched around her phone. She had known deep down, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a shock to the system. This wasn't just a bad accident, it wasn't just carelessness. Someone had tried to kill her. "Do you have any lids?" she asked, though she knew the answer already. "There's evidence pointing to intentional manipulation of the furnace's ignition system, but we're still gathering the full picture," Redding said. "I'll need to speak to you again in the morning. There's more I need to go over with you." Judy glanced at the living room where Brandon and Aaron sat. Aaron was talking too quickly, her words running together like a rehearsed line. Brandon's face was tight, his eyes darting between the kitchen and Aaron, too quick to settle on anything. Judy hung up and walked slowly back into the kitchen. She opened the drawer where she kept her photos, evidence she'd been gathering for months, ever since the small incidents had started to feel less like accidents and more like a pattern. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out a picture of the stove burner that had been left on for hours, the one that nearly caused an explosion. She had the timestamp on it, proof that it had been left on far too long. Then there was the circuit breaker incident, when her medical device had nearly failed because of a faulty breaker, the one that Aaron had fixed too quickly, almost too calmly. But it wasn't just these small things. Judy knew what it meant now. She wasn't just a mother being slowly pushed out of her home, out of her life. This was a deliberate effort to get rid of her, to take what was hers, and she couldn't pretend anymore that it was anything less than that. She shoved the pictures back into the drawer and walked out into the living room, where Brandon was now leaning back on the couch, arms crossed, face tight. He was pretending not to notice her. "Brandon," Judy said, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." He looked up at her, his smile faltering just slightly. "Mom, what now?" "About the money," she said, "and about everything else. I know what you've been doing." Erin froze, her eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice was too sharp, too defensive. Judy's gaze moved to Maddie, who was sitting at the edge of the hallway watching them both. Judy's heart ached. The girl had seen it all. Brandon let out a sharp breath, standing abruptly. "You won't need it forever, Mom," he snapped, his temper rising. Erin gasped, the words slipping out far too easily. "Brandon, don't." Maddie bolted from the room, tears streaming down her face. Judy's throat tightened. She didn't have to say anything more. The truth had already been spoken. Her hand slid into her pocket, where the crumpled note from Maddie rested. "Mom said we'll be rich soon." It was time to make sure that they never touched it. Redding came back the next afternoon with a different energy. Judy saw it before he spoke. The stiff shoulders, the plain dark coat, the small black recorder in his hand. "Ms. Callahan," he said, stepping inside, "I need formal statements from everyone." Brandon was on the couch, TV muted, jaw tight. Aaron sat perched beside him, knees pressed together, fingers strangling a throw pillow. Maddie hove. Red in the hallway, half hidden. Redding set the recorder on the coffee table, clicked it on. "Fire Marshal Cole Redding, follow-up interview regarding the Callahan residence fire." He took Judy's statement first. She kept it simple: smell of burning, utility room, smoke, the door that wouldn't open, no accusations, not yet. Then Redding turned to the couch. Mr. Callahan. Brandon leaned forward, trying to look bored. Same story as before. I heard her coughing, tried the door, it was stuck. Alarms go off, I open it. Chaos, that's it. You didn't try the door before the alarms? Redding asked. Brandon hesitated. Yeah, I did, it wouldn't move. Old frame, you know how it is. Aaron jumped in too fast. The heat warped it. You said that was possible, right? Old wood, bad latch, it was a freak thing. Redding didn't even look at her. We've ruled that out, he said. The frame wasn't warped, the door didn't stick, it was held. The room went still. He flipped open a small notepad. We found pressure marks on the outside edge of the door and knob. Someone braced it shut. Brandon's face drained. So what? I leaned on it for a second. People panic in fires. Before Redding could answer, a small voice cut through. That's not what happened. Maddie stood in the doorway, pale but steady, clutching her phone. Redding softened. Maddie, you don't have to. I already did, she whispered. I recorded it. Aaron lurched to her feet. Honey, no, you misunderstood. What did you record? Judy asked, keeping her voice calm. Maddie's hands shook as she unlocked her phone. I heard Dad yelling. I was in the hall. I hit record. She handed it to Redding. He scrolled, pressed play, set the phone beside his recorder. Smoke crackled through the tiny speaker. Judy heard her own ragged coughing, fists on the door. On the recording, Brandon's voice came clear and close. Stay calm, Mom. Then her own desperate shout. Brandon, open the door. Silence, then a whisper from farther back, unmistakable. Is she done yet? Aaron's voice. On the audio, Brandon replied lower, harsher. Just give it a minute, the alarms will go off. In the living room, real-time Brandon shot up. That's out of context, I was trying to. Aaron cracked. You held the door, Brandon, she screamed. You said the smoke would do it faster, you said. Her next words ripped out of her like they'd been waiting at the edge of her teeth. She wasn't supposed to come out. The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Aaron froze, realizing. I didn't mean he planned it, not me. He messed with the furnace, I just. Brandon spun on her. You bought the accelerant, you're the one who told Maddie we'd be rich. Redding calmly stopped the playback. The only sound was Aaron's breathing, sharp and panicked. For the record, he said, voice cool, both Brandon and Aaron Callahan have acknowledged actions suggesting intent to harm Judith Callahan. He pocketed the recorder and took out his phone. You can't do this, Brandon said, but it came out thin. Redding met Judy's eyes. She wrapped an arm around Maddie, felt the girl shaking, and gave a single, steady nod. Redding spoke into the phone. This is Redding. I'm at the Callahan residence. I need a unit dispatched. I've got audio evidence and verbal admissions consistent with attempted homicide. Judy walked into the bank like she had every right to be there, like the walls and polished counters were her domain. The air inside was cooler than the streets outside, and the soft hum of computers and faint murmurs of customers made the place feel both busy and impersonal, the kind of place where transactions are numbers, not people. She was here to reclaim control. Her heels clicked with purpose as she approached the teller's counter, her fingers curled tight around the folder of documents Lydia had prepared. Everything she needed was neatly tucked inside. Updated wills, beneficiary changes, powers of attorney, all notarized and ready to go. Good morning, the teller said with a smile, but it faltered slightly when Judy slid the folder across the counter. Hi, Judy said. Her voice was steady, calm, but with a quiet force she'd never known she had. I need to speak with the bank manager. The teller's smile returned, but it was polite and distant, as if she knew this wasn't going to be a typical transaction. She made a quick call and gestured to the waiting area. Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Jennings know you're here. Judy nodded and walked to the small seating area near the windows. The sun outside was a thin sliver behind clouds, casting the room in a muted glow. She felt strangely at peace in this quiet space, surrounded by people who didn't know the weight of what had happened or the storm that was still to come. She opened the folder again, flipping through the pages, her eyes scanning the text, making sure everything was in order. The trust had been updated to exclude Brandon and Aaron entirely, leaving everything to Maddie and a handful of charities Judy had supported for years. She knew what had to be done. A few minutes later, Mr. Jennings walked up to her, a well-dressed man in his 50s with a strong handshake and the air of someone who had seen it all. Ms. Callahan, thank you for coming in. How can I help? Judy stood and greeted him with a firm handshake. I'd like to update my beneficiaries and transfer all my accounts to a protected trust. I want to make sure no one can access these accounts without my express consent. Mr. Jennings nodded. Of course, we'll make sure everything is in order. I'll have you fill out some paperwork and we'll take care of the rest. I trust you have your legal documents. I do, she said, pushing the folder toward him. Everything is already signed and notarized. He glanced through the paperwork, his brow furrowing slightly as he reached the pages related to the account access. It looks like you've made some significant changes here, he said, looking up at her. Your son, Brandon Callahan, he hasn't had access to these accounts recently, has he? Judy's chest tightened. Of course he had inquired, this wasn't a surprise, she'd expected it. She felt the sharp bite of his attempts to control her life, every inquiry, every question, every threat like nails on a chalkboard. No, she said quietly, but the weight behind her words was clear. He has no access anymore. Freeze all joint access. Mr. Jennings paused, eyes narrowing slightly as he made a note in his ledger. I'll make sure all joint access is revoked. We'll get those transfers processed and set up the protective trust. No one will be able to touch your accounts without your permission. Judy exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a little. This was it. This was where she took back control. Her life had been a string of small compromises, of letting others take the lead, take the power, but not anymore. As Mr. Jennings turned to the computer to process the changes, Judy felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She didn't reach for it. The moment felt too important, too definitive. She wasn't going to let anything pull her back now. Mr. Jennings looked up at her again, his expression more serious now. I've also noticed that Brandon recently inquired about your account balances, specifically regarding your retirement funds. Judy froze just for a moment. The blood drained from her face, but she quickly steadied herself. Of course he had. He thought he could still get to it. He thought she was too old, too frail to fight back. I'm aware, she said, her voice steady now, no trace of hesitation. He no longer has any access to those funds. Mr. Jennings nodded slowly. Understood, we'll ensure everything is secured. It will take some time, but it'll be done. As the paperwork began to shuffle, Judy's eyes flicked to the window. The world outside moved by at its usual pace, unaware of the battle she had been fighting, but not anymore. She felt a surge of something unfamiliar, power maybe, the sense that she was finally on solid ground. This was her life, her future. No one would take it from her again. Lydia's voice echoed in her mind, you've been patient. Now you take back what's yours. Judy stood straighter as Mr. Jennings handed her the final documents to sign. She signed them without hesitation, feeling the weight lift off her shoulders. With each stroke of the pen, her future was more securely in her hands. The documents were filed away, the new trust locked into place. She stood ready to leave when Mr. Jennings handed her one final sheet, confirmation that her accounts had been frozen and transferred to the trust. She left the bank with her head held high, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. For the first time in years, Judy felt truly free. And in the back of her mind, the thought lingered, they'll never touch it. Not now, not ever. Judy's phone buzzed just as she stepped into the quiet of her front hallway. She barely had time to register the number before it rang again, its pulse demanding attention. She didn't need to look at the screen. She already knew who it was. Brandon. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment, then she pressed answer, her expression unreadable. You think you've won, don't you? Brandon's voice exploded through the speaker, filled with raw anger. You really think whatever this is going to keep me from what's mine? Judy leaned back against the wall, her pulse steady, despite the venom in his words. She didn't flinch. I survived you, she said softly, the words like a quiet confession, but there was no fear in them. Brandon's next words came out in a burst of rage. You think this is over? You think you can just cut me off like this? I'll fight you for everything. I'll take you to court. I'll make sure you never see a dime of your own money again. The harsh sound of a door slamming came through the line, and then crashing like something heavy being thrown. Judy's eyes narrowed as the distant sound of Brandon's tantrum filtered through the phone. He was losing control. You've been losing control for a while now, haven't you? She said, her voice like cold water over a simmering flame. You never cared about me, you cared about what I had. You took everything from me, you can't do this. I'm your son, I deserve it, all of it. Judy could hear him pacing on the other end, his voice crackling with barely restrained fury. She almost felt sorry for him, but then the memory of the locked door, the choking smoke, flooded her thoughts again. Her eyes darted to the kitchen table, where the documents she'd signed earlier still lay in neat stacks. The life she'd worked for, now truly hers again. I didn't take anything from you, Brandon, she said evenly. You tried to take everything from me. He raged for a few more seconds, the words coming out in a broken mess, but Judy was done listening. He would never get another chance to control her. Then the phone beeped, indicating another call coming through. She saw the name flash on the screen. Lydia Carson. Judy glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 6 p.m. Lydia's call was expected. She switched to the new call, and Lydia's voice came through almost instantly. a steady presence on the other end. Judy, Lydia asked, her tone businesslike but with a hint of concern. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Judy replied, steady. Brandon just called, it's begun. Lydia's voice softened. He'll escalate, they both will, but we've got this, Judy. Just remember, you're not alone in this. The sound of shuffling papers reached her ears, a soft chuckle. Lydia was smirking, she could hear it. I'm listening to the call right now, Judy, Lydia said, her tone lighter now. It's clear from his tone that he's unraveling. I think we're at the tipping point. He doesn't know it, but everything's about to shift in your favor. Judy let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It's too late for him to turn back, isn't it? Exactly, and we've got more than just his threats. We've got proof. Let him fight, let him make all the noise he wants. It'll only make it worse for him. As they spoke, Judy's phone buzzed again, a text from Maddie. She pulled it up, her heart sinking. Dad is breaking things. Judy's heart tightened in her chest as she glanced back down the hallway toward Maddie's room. The front door slammed open. The sound of Brandon's angry steps echoed through the house. Maddie, Judy called, already moving toward the stairs. Stay in your room, honey. I'll be fine, Mom, Maddie's voice came back soft, shaky. Judy's mind raced, but Lydia's calm voice cut through the growing panic. Judy, don't engage, call Redding now, get the officers there, your safety is the priority. Judy stepped into the hallway, her mind already shifting gears. This was it, the tipping point. Brandon's temper had gone too far and he was unraveling in the worst possible way. Maddie, stay in your room, Judy called again, stepping into the living room as Brandon's shouts reached her ears. She grabbed her phone, dialing the number she'd come to trust. Redding, he answered on the first ring. I need a welfare check at my house now. Now, Redding, Judy's voice was sharp, calm but urgent. My son's out of control. He's a threat to me, to Maddie. You need to send someone immediately. There was a brief pause before Redding's calm voice came through. We're on the way, Ms. Callahan. Stay inside. Keep your phone closed. We'll handle it. Judy ended the call and moved swiftly to Maddie's door, tapping lightly. Mom, I'm right here, sweetheart, Judy said softly, opening the door. We're going to be okay. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but Judy felt a quiet strength wash over her as she stood with her back straight. She had taken her life back. And this time, nobody was going to take it from her. The knock came early, firm and official, 3 even raps that vibrated through the doorframe. Judy opened it to find Redding on the porch, flanked by a woman in a navy blazer with a county seal and a uniformed officer. His expression told her everything before he spoke. Ms. Callahan, he said, we've got the final results. Can we come in? She stepped aside. They moved into the living room, bringing the cold March air and something heavier with them. Redding opened a thin file on the coffee table. Photos, reports, highlighted blocks of text. Forensics found accelerant traces on the utility room floor, he said, poured in a pattern leading to the furnace. This wasn't a malfunction. He slid a close-up of the door jamb toward her, white dust, dark smudges. We lifted partial prints on the outside edge, he went on. Pressure marks where someone braced their hand and leaned in. The ridge detail matches Brandon's right hand. The room seemed to tilt for a second, then steadied. Judy stared at the photo, at the place where she'd beaten her fists while choking on smoke. And the recording, she asked. The audio your granddaughter took is clean, the woman in the blazer answered. It's time-stamped, lines up with the alarms and 911 call. It captures intent and sequence. It's admissible. She extended a hand. I'm Assistant DA Morales. We've charged your son with attempted aggravated murder and aggravated arson. He's being held pending a bail hearing. Judy let the words land. She felt no satisfaction, only a grave, quiet rightness. And Aaron, her voice didn't shake. Complicity and accessory charges, Morales said. Her own statement she wasn't supposed to come out doesn't leave us much wiggle room. Another woman stepped forward, softer around the edges, a badge on a lanyard. Ms. Callahan, I'm with Children's Services. I spoke with Maddie after the welfare check. She told us she feels safest with you. Judy's hand went to the back of the couch, steadying herself. We're arranging an emergency kinship placement, the woman continued. If you're willing, Maddie can stay with you while this goes through the courts. I'm willing, Judy said immediately. Bring her home. Redding closed the file. This is moving fast now, he said. Fire, forensics, audio, digital trails. Your son and Aaron thought they could stage an accident and walk away. They were wrong. Judy's phone buzzed. A text from Lydia lit the screen. Just saw the charges. Forensics are strong. Also, found something big in Brandon's financial records. Call me, you'll want to hear how deep this really goes. Judy looked from the message to the closed file on her table. The fire had started in the utility room. But the real blaze, the one that was about to burn through every lie Brandon ever told, was only just catching. The conference room felt colder than it should have. Judy sat at one end of the table, Maddie pressed close to her side. Lydia occupied the chair on Judy's other flank, legal pad open, pen ready. Across from them, Assistant DA Morales spread a stack of documents like she was laying out evidence in a trial, because she was. We already had them on the fire, Morales said. This is the part that locks in motive. She slid the first page toward Judy. It was a printout from her life insurance company. 3 weeks before the fire, someone requested an early payout review on your policy, Morales said. Not a claim, just a what happens if she dies suddenly inquiry. Judy's stomach tightened. I never made that call. I know, Morales replied. The request came from Brandon's IP address, and this. She laid down an e-signature form. At the bottom, in jagged digital ink, Judith Callahan. That isn't my signature, Judy said, voice flat. Our examiner agrees, Lydia cut in. He forged it. Morales moved to the next document. 2 weeks before the fire, Brandon started an online pre-authorization to transfer this house into joint survivorship, your name and his. Didn't go through only because it required you to appear in person. So if I died, Judy said slowly, it would have fallen to him clean. Exactly. Another sheet, a call log from Judy's retirement plan. Here, Morales said, tapping the page. Your son asking what it would take to change your retirement beneficiaries and what proof of death they'd need. Maddie's fingers dug into Judy's sleeve. Judy slid her hand over the girl's. And Aaron, Lydia asked. Morales pulled out a printed text thread. Aaron, we need everything in place before anything happens. Brandon, papers first, then we let the rest play out. Aaron, insurance, house, retirement. Brandon, working on all three. Timeline is tight but manageable. That's conspiracy in writing, Morales said. She knew exact. TLY what he was doing and when. Charges rattled off like a list of debts coming due. Insurance, fraud, forgery, attempted theft, all stacked on top of attempted murder and arson. Right now, Morales added, he's in an interrogation room hearing all of this. Judy imagined her son at that metal table, the forms laid out before him, his own words read back. For years, he'd treated her like a walking account number. Her phone buzzed. A brief text from Morales' investigator lit the screen. Brandon collapsed during questioning. Medics called. Interrogation paused for now. Maddie looked up at her, eyes wide. Is he? Judy squeezed her hand, gaze steady. I don't know, she said. But whatever happens, Maddie, the truth is on paper now. He doesn't get to rewrite it. The courtroom felt like a refrigerator wrapped in wood paneling. Judy sat in the second row, Maddie pressed close against her side, small fingers hooked around her wrist. Lydia sat on the other side, legal pad ready but mostly still. Up front, Brandon and Aaron were at the defense table, he in county orange, she in a washed-out blouse that didn't soften the hard set of her jaw. State of Ohio v. Brandon Callahan and Aaron Callahan, the bailiff called. Fire Marshal Redding was the first real blow. On the screen, the photos of the utility room filled the room, the clean arc of the burn, the highlighted accelerant traces. In my expert opinion, Redding said, calm as a weather report, this was not an accidental fire. The ignition system was tampered with, accelerant was poured in a deliberate pattern, someone said this. He pointed to a close-up of the door jamb. We processed the exterior, partial prints consistent with someone bracing the door shut. Those prints match the right hand of the defendant, Brandon Callahan. A rustle moved through the jury box. Brandon stared at the table, jaw flexing tight. Then came the audio. Morales warned the jury, the lights dimmed, the recording played. Smoke alarms screamed through the speakers. Judy heard her own coughing, the thud of her fists on the door, her voice cracked. Brandon opened the door. Then his voice close and clear, stay calm, Mom. Rattling silence. Aaron's whisper slid through the room like ice water. Is she done yet? On the recording, Brandon's reply followed, just give it a minute, the alarms will go off. When the clip stopped, you could hear someone in the gallery exhale. The defense tried to call it panic, confusion. The jury's faces said otherwise. Lydia finished the job. She walked them through the forged e-signature, the early insurance payout inquiry, the unfinished deed transfer, the retirement call, the text thread about timeline and before anything happens. This wasn't grief, she said calmly, this was planning. Aaron, who had started the trial jumpy and tearful, went still as stone, eyes fixed on some invisible point. Brandon just stared at the table like he could burn a hole through it. Deliberations took less than an afternoon. On count one, attempted aggravated murder, the foreperson read, guilty. Count after count, the word repeated, guilty for him, guilty for her. As deputies cuffed them, Brandon turned, searching the benches. His eyes met Judy's, wild, empty, something broken behind them. She didn't look away. Outside, when the heavy courthouse doors swung open, the air hit cool and clean. Maddie's hand slipped into hers, trust and fear mixed together. Is it over? Maddie whispered. Not everything, Judy said, steady, but the worst of it is behind us. They started down the steps together, toward a house still scarred by smoke, and a life she finally had the power to rebuild. The utility room didn't smell like smoke anymore. It smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner, like the first day in a new house. The old scorched door was gone, replaced with a solid white one that swung open easily under Judy's hand. New tile gleamed under the light, pale gray and cool to the touch. The furnace sat in the corner, serviced, tagged, and humming quietly, no longer a monster, just machinery. Maddie leaned in the doorway, socked feet on the fresh threshold. It doesn't even look like the same room, she said. That's the point, Judy replied. We're not living in that night anymore. Maddie smiled, a real one this time, not the brittle thing she'd worn for months. She had color in her cheeks again, art supplies spilling out of a bin in the dining room, school projects taped to the fridge like they belonged there. At night, she slept through until morning. The chaos had been replaced by routines. Homework at the table, dinner without yelling, weekends that didn't feel like walking on glass. A few days earlier, Lydia had sat at that same table, spreading out one last neat stack of documents. This is the end of the line, Judy, she'd said, tapping the top page. Everything S in the irrevocable trust. Nobody touches anything without your say-so, not now, not ever. Judy had signed Han. D steady, when the notary's stamp thudded down, something inside her settled. The maze of accounts, policies, and paperwork that Brandon tried to twist into a trap had become a wall he could never climb. Redding stopped by on a Saturday, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes taking in the brightened utility room with a faint, approving nod. You did good work in here, he said. So did you, Judy answered. There wasn't much more to say. They both understood what it meant to stand in this room and breathe easily. That evening, after Maddie went to bed, Judy sat at the kitchen table with her journal. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel dangerous anymore. She wrote slowly, carefully, fire tested me, law restored me. Closing the journal, she walked back to the utility room and stood beside the furnace. No shaking, no flash of panic, just the steady thrum of a system she now controlled. She touched the cool metal once, then turned off the light. He held the door shut, but I walked into the bank, owning a future he'll never touch.